Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 622. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. Today, in the SPaMCAST 622, we feature my interview with Brian Gill, CEO of Gillware. Brian is a serial entrepreneur in the software and cyber world. We discuss the importance of cybersecurity, real backups, having disaster recovery plans, and the fact that just having data in the cloud is not a security strategy. Brian's bio. Brian is a computer scientist, entrepreneur, and angel investor. Brian currently serves as Chairman of Gillware, which provides cyber risk assessments, data recovery, incident response, and digital forensic services. He is co-founder of Phoenix Nuclear Labs and serves on P&L's board from inception when it decided to spin off Shine Medical Technologies. Those two companies have raised over $100 million in venture capital and employ hundreds of people in Wisconsin. Are you ready to talk cybersecurity? It's time for the interview. Brian Gill, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Tom, thanks so much for having me.
This is a real joy. So why don't we jump right in? We're living in a complex world, and things like cybersecurity, data recovery, are they more important than they ever have been?
I think that they're having a more, the cybersecurity readiness is certainly having a bigger impact, a negative impact to American businesses than ever before. I would suggest that means that they are incredibly important topics that business leaders and even people like programmers, should start to be thinking about these things more when they're even designing software. Yeah.
So it's funny. A friend reached out to do a podcast about the new capability maturity model, cybersecurity. I'm not 100% sure of the name, but the SEI Institute is pushing via the DoD this whole idea of cybersecurity. If you're building software, let's say, how do you ensure that you're actually checking the boxes and doing it right?
Yeah, so what's coming down the path, and this has been coming down the path for a while now, where organizations like the DoD now have these new rules that say you have to adhere to these standards, and there's like a 5-level standard. And if you want to be anywhere in the Department of Defense supply chain, and there's 100,000+ companies in the Department of Defense supply chain, if you want to sell even like a nut or a bolt or a washer for a submarine, you're going to have to be level 1 certified. And these actually, I think, are good improvements to the previous frameworks, and especially because they come, or they're trying to bring some enforcement teeth and some auditability to them. So it's not just on your honor to say that you do certain things, because there's a lot of danger with that. It's really trying to get this machine moving where these are the standards to be tier 1 certified, and this is how you become tier 1 certified, and other intelligent humans come in and verify that you're actually following these practices. Because some of the frameworks of the past were mostly just paperwork related, but lots and lots of organizations didn't actually do the things that the paperwork would suggest that they did. And there was no renewal period, and there was no, they didn't come back every couple of years to do additional add-on audits or surprise audits. So this is a trend where the federal government, at least, is going to be requiring their vendors to adhere to certain policies. This trend will not stop and is not stopping with the federal government. If you're going to do any business-to-business business, right? If you are going to have other large enterprise businesses and you are their vendor, this train is coming down the tracks. If you haven't seen it already, you're going to start to get these as part of your proposal. They're going to want to know about all these things, how you protect their data, how you protect their clients' information. And if you have bad answers, you are going to lose that RFP. You are not going to be their vendor anymore if you don't start taking this stuff seriously. So if nothing else, there's going to be a large financial incentive for people to actually start to take this whole stuff seriously.
We're in a scenario where, people are certifying, going down that path. Still, things are going to happen, and data is going to be lost. Data is going to be corrupted. It's happened to all of us, right? So, spent many a year in the banking and insurance field, and stuff happened, regardless of how well we attempted to protect it. How does that get dealt with? If we're going to have these standards that say you're going to adhere to them, we're still going to also have to deal with incidents where we lose stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about mitigation, right? There's some things you can do with risk. You can try to prevent these disasters, and we definitely should. But then we also need to couple that with, okay, let's assume something bad happened. What's our plan? And how do we make sure that event we lost as little data as possible? And if we have some kind of a hack to a system, how do we make sure that network has appropriate segmentation where that the amount of damage that any one incident can happen is very low, and that we identify those incidents as quickly as possible? So again, it's not just about prevention. We need to also be figuring out what happens when the bad stuff does happen, working to make sure it's as small as possible, as contained as possible. And then even that an organization has some more traditional, you mentioned the word as an industry, but the insurance industry. If you're a entrepreneur or a business owner or a business leader, and you don't know how much cyber insurance you have, that's a big problem. You should know the answer to that question.
Many organizations have gone down the path of engineering their solutions to get away from having it in their own physical location. They've moved it to the cloud and feel that that's a substantial reduction in risk. Is it a reduction in risk? Do we have the same sort of data recovery and cybersecurity issues?
Well, Tom, if it was a substantial silver bullet, then we wouldn't have an exponential growth in the amount of data loss and data hacks that are happening. And certainly, the cloud is a wonderful thing. And if you're even a mid-sized business, being able to not have to deal with these like 5 to 7 year replacement cycles on server farms, I mean, it's awesome, right? It really is. Just saying, listen, Amazon or whoever, just take care of this. And when I need more equipment, I push the button that gives me more CPUs. And when I don't need those CPUs, I push the button the other way. And the cloud is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And certainly the word cloud has it's not just a server, right? And when you tell people that you have a cloud or a private cloud that you're hosting for them, it certainly has a huge connotation of the amount of robustness that is implied by that term, right? The problem is not all clouds, not all the things that people are selling as clouds are really what I would call clouds. Some of these private clouds that people are selling are really just servers. And that's a huge problem. And some of the biggest targets, I mean, again, as we start, so we have a client on the ransomware side of things where they were a managed service company that was providing a private cloud for a certain industry. And they had, many hundreds of small businesses in that industry that they were providing managed services and cloud hosting of point of sale systems and all the things that these businesses have in common, right? So they were providing the software, they were providing the interfaces, they were providing the point of sale, the CRM, and they were providing all of this for many hundreds of businesses. Now, if you're a criminal, if you're a cyber criminal, would you want to target one of those businesses? Or would you prefer to target all 200 of them at once?
Oh, I know the answer to that one.
Yeah, I can make 200 times the ransom money by hitting one target. And those private cloud companies are massive targets. And to kind of take a step back, one of the very dangerous things with this whole cloud concept is I talk to a lot of C-level executives, and it's like, well, how do you back your data up? And they're like, it's in the cloud. That's not an answer. Like, I understand that your on-prem data is on the cloud, and I understand that you don't have physical infrastructure in your building. How does that data get backed up? How does it ideally transfer to a different cloud provider? Like, having all of my eggs in one basket is dangerous. I want my data over here, and if it's in a cloud, I need a different third-party company with different networking equipment, different support staff, different corporate infrastructure, where my critical data gets moved over there in a ideally platform agnostic way. So that, again, because sometimes these providers just go out of business, right? I mean, just normal business stuff can happen sometimes with these providers. So, I want my data in the cloud, sure, but I need it in two clouds. And I want that backup happening automatically with encryption. And I want to make sure that it doesn't absolve me as a business owner or as a CIO. I'm not absolved about understanding how my data gets backed up and audited because my primary data source is in a cloud. That didn't happen. So, you still have that burden. And a lot of people, just don't, they just, it's in the cloud. I don't know. XYZ company just takes care of it for me.
Why is that such an easy jump to make? I mean, I've heard that. So if I've heard that and I'm not in that business, if I've heard that answer before, I'm sure you've heard it a million times. Why is that such easy? Because both of us I had to stifle myself from giggling when I heard that answer because it isn't an answer.
Right. Yeah. Well, I just think that in general, we have a lot of non-technologists that are C-level executives, right? And a lot of these C-level executives are super smart. They're kings of or queens of their field, and they are subject matter experts in what they do to a level that is incredibly impressive. And sometimes there's often a big ego on the other end of that. And a lot of these types of personalities don't enjoy being non-subject matter experts or getting into discussions about things they don't understand. And all of this IT stuff historically is just kind of a cost to do business. And they just, I don't know, just let the nerds deal with it. Like, I don't want to know anything about this. Just like, how much are we going to spend on it? Okay, that much, that's fine. Just take care of it. They just they're not comfortable wading into these waters and understanding enough about this emerging threats to really make good decisions and set proper budgets. If anything else, at least, like 20 years ago when I was getting started in my career, when we had this whole Y2K thing, we finally had a lot of these old stodgy companies in the US that hadn't spent money on IT or systems in many, many years. And the federal government passed a bunch of regulations that dragged some of these dinosaurs kicking and screaming into the year 2000. And I think we're in a similar cycle here. I think over the next 3 years, there's a whole bunch of companies and a whole bunch of executives that are going to have no choice but to get dragged kicking and screaming into 2023. And there's going to be a higher than average amount of money spent in IT. It's not going to be the standard 1 or 2% of your budget. It's going to need to be like 5% for a couple of years as these people play catch up.
Now, Brian, one of the things that your organization does is data recovery. When we're talking about data recovery, is it possible to recover if you get blasted in the cloud? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, so we get people that are running clouds send us equipment commonly. It's again, because the cloud at the end of the day is a bunch of hardware. It is a bunch of hard disks. It is a bunch of flash memory. It actually physically does live somewhere, and these things have problems. And the humans that maintain these things also have problems, and everybody can see it. Once every couple of years, somebody pushes the wrong button on Google, and the whole infrastructure of the search engine goes down for like 20 minutes, right? I mean, there are obviously systems and humans behind all this stuff, and there are human problems and there are system problems. And yeah, I mean, we had so like what Gillware does is when people lose data due to some of the more traditional human error or the more traditional explosion of computing systems, they bring us that equipment. And we have electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, computer scientists whose job it is to figure out what the heck happened and then overcome those problems to recover the data for them. And sometimes it's very simple devices. You know, some person like Tom has a cell phone they hadn't backed up in 5 years, and they walk it into the ocean in their swimming trunks, and theirs goes 5 years worth of family photos. And they just want that one little tiny device to get resurrected, or a laptop or a desktop drive or whatever. And, you know, we also see many times where some of the biggest companies in the world, publicly traded companies that everybody's heard of, call us in a panic because a 48 drive SAN that has hundreds of millions of dollars worth of data had some sort of massive problem, a flood in a data center, a fire in a data center. These things were very, very, very redundant, but there was some sort of horrifying physical event that actually managed to take out both a primary and a backup. And all that stuff gets loaded up into some sort of big van and driven over here to Madison, Wisconsin.
So we're back to the scenario where if you have all your eggs in one basket, if it's all, let's say it's on-prem, even if you have it, highly redundant and multiple places on the same prem, you're in deep trouble.
You can be. Yeah, I mean, and it takes a lot. There's often a large comedy of errors, things that are very unlikely. Maybe 2 or 3 things that there's a less than 1% chance that they would happen. But those moons and fates align sometimes. And when they do, they have to call us. I mean, we had a company that's one of the best data center moving companies in the world. And this is a very, very small industry. But if you ever need to move a data center, there are companies that specialize in moving that stuff from here to there, getting it all plugged back in, and not having anything go sideways. But it was in a vehicle, and that vehicle was in an accident. Sometimes these things happen, and they just so happened that some of the primary and the secondary unit were both in a pretty nasty car wreck, and they didn't function. And if you would have seen the pictures, you'd be like, oh, that's not going to function. So they needed somebody to, get it all cataloged and get it all organized and get some hard drives fixed and get them linearized and get their data. And they needed it pretty quickly, So a lot of times, even when you do everything right, bad stuff can happen.
You've had a fairly broad career up to this point. Software developer, entrepreneur, angel investor. Is there a common thread in all that? And how would you classify that kind of a common thread so that my younger listeners can start thinking about where they go?
Yeah, I mean, my number one advice to young, people who are coming up in the world of software development is always avoid being that person that is stuck in a cube who just gets the requirements handed to you on a silver platter and just coding everything that those requirements say to do. There's a human element to programming. Now, to kind of answer your questions, the world of software, there's a thought process, there's some sort of need from a business user, or there's a need from an end user, and they're going to bring you some requirements, and you're going to have to think hard about, okay, what problem are we trying to solve here? And then we're going to try to chop that problem up into a bunch of pieces. We're going to try to prioritize. What are we going to work on first? What are we going to work on second? What's really required for phase one? And then what are we going to work on over time, right? We're going to have to build a team of humans to design the software, to the infrastructure where it's going to run, to perform quality assurance on that software, to unit test that software, to deploy that software. So we're going to have to build this little team of humans to kind of tackle this project, right? And then we're going to iterate on that. That's going to have some bugs because software has bugs, right? And we're going to have to go through this iterative process where we take feedback from people, make these little micro adjustments, get them released with thoughtful patch notes, and communicate to our clients and give them the kind of training or whatever came with those new features or new requirements. This is exactly the same thing that we do when we start businesses. It's not just analogous, it's identical, right? There's this human element, so we're dealing, instead of with, object-oriented programming, we're dealing with humans instead of these objects. But and those humans have, situations where they've got, children and kids and COVIDs and, sick leave and dogs they need to take to the veterinarian. So yeah, obviously these humans are more volatile than your interfaces, but it's the thought process of going from an idea to a project plan to team building to implement plan. I would argue it's exactly the same type of thing that you do when you're starting up any business. And it's the same thing that a programmer does. So people who have the logical mind, the problem solving mind to really get in, work with those end users to understand their needs, go back, and then 3 months later deliver exactly something that meets those needs that they're over the moon about. These people could be great C-level executives of their own companies. They just need to replace the Java virtual machine with, capitalism.
How did you discover this? How did you come to this point? As I said, you started out as a software developer. Did you know that instinctually, or is that something that you learned as you progressed through your career?
I mean, I always have been interested by money. And I think a lot of people who grow up with small amounts of it are, right? I definitely came from a normal, lower to middle class background. And, when I couldn't get some of the things that I wanted, like a new pair of shoes or a Michael Jordan basketball card or whatever I kind of coveted back then, like I came to realize pretty early that, you need a bunch of money to get this kind of stuff that you want. And, so, and I kind of knew enough about the world and figured out enough about the world to know that you're never going to make the kind of living that I wanted to make and have the kind of success that I wanted to have working for some big corporate machine. Right. I figured that out pretty early. And I also like to program really early. So I was on the incredibly nerdy end of the spectrum and, wrote my first computer program in BASIC before the age of 10. And it's certainly something that I really enjoyed and my parents supported, right? I mean, my parents didn't have a lot of money and they bought me that IBM PC Junior, which was at the time, it literally cost more than 10% of their annual, earnings. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a pretty crazy sacrifice. And they are not computer people, never were. They understood that they had a son who was into this stuff and had some exposure to it. And they bought something almost the equivalent of a car for their child to get some additional exposure to it, even though they did not understand what it was. Pretty amazing stuff. Some of our parents set a very high bar. Mm-hmm. But, I've always been interested in capitalism, interested in computers, interested in starting businesses. And I don't really remember a time when I wasn't. So it's hard to say where does that come from. I have no idea.
Yeah. Brian, this has been absolutely fantastic. If you woke up tomorrow morning, somebody handed you a cup of coffee and a magic wand and said that you had 2 wishes that you could use to basically change how we deal with the world of disaster recovery, cybersecurity, data recovery, what would they be and why?
I think it's the number one problem. So the short answer is humans, and the C-level humans that run America, who almost all Americans depend on for their living, right? These humans need extra leadership. They need to learn about cybersecurity, and they need to make sure they know enough to properly hire the right people and budget the right amount. Because if those C-level executives don't wake up, there's no amount of technical mumbo jumbo that is going to defeat that problem. They need to do better. They must do better. Now, that's obviously a really obtuse kind of high level pie in the sky, whatever answer. There's 2 things that if you're listening, that if you're not doing, oh boy, you got a big problem. One, I would, again, if you're a smaller business, air gap and audit your backups. So at some point, once a month at least, all of your most critical data needs to get exported to a piece of physical infrastructure that you check it and make sure that all of the stuff you care about is actually in there and the dates are correct, and it's in a format where you can restore from it. And you know that because you've done it. You've performed mock restores and you've walked through those procedures or what's going to happen when the disaster strikes, right? So that's number one, is air-gapped, automated, audited backups, okay? And that's hard. You're going to have to spend money on that. If you want to pay an IT guy for 10 or 20 hours to do a mock restore every 6 months, he's going to charge you, or she's going to charge you money for that. So spend the money. And I say air-gapped because I literally do not want those backups plugged into any computer network. I want it offline, because the most dangerous threat is these cyber criminals. And we do not want them being able to destroy your backups, because it's happening hundreds of times a day right now. So the second big thing is user authentication, everybody's favorite topic. I think your audience, being a bunch of technologists, this is probably not news to them, but they may work at organizations that have really, really, really crappy user authentication. And if all you need to get onto your network, if all you need to log into your systems is a username and a password, well, that hasn't been good enough for 15 years. You absolutely must have multiple factors of authentication to get onto these critical business systems. I would argue even just your personal data. Like my mother-in-law is 2FAing her everything now. Okay, and so that's, she just mostly has cake recipes and pictures of her grandkids. So this is user authentication. It's insane that you can log into your stuff with a username and password.
And a username and password that's been stored on your laptop, and Dell just rolls it out every time you need it.
Well, yeah, and and again, a lot of humans have that 1 or 2 or 3 passwords they use for everything, and sometimes the Yahoos of the world get hacked, and the bad guys obtain billions of username and password combinations. Mm-hmm. It happens. This stuff happens. So move away from passwords. Start to look into some of the more modern solutions, like the USB keys from YubiKey or something like that. And if you have to use a username and password, insist on a second factor of authentication. That is not your freaking email. This is the other big problem, is it's like, yep, we have 2-factor, and when I go to log in, it sends me an email. All of this authentication stuff, we have to think about it through the lens of a hack. If a bad guy has infiltrated a system because they have a username and password, let's just go ahead and assume they have access to your freaking email, right? And it's not good enough. It should be a rotating digit code on a smartphone or something along those lines. So, again, to get really, really granular, audit those backups, think hard about user authentication, and frankly, if you were doing those two things at the technical level, your overall risk profile just reduced like 80%.
Well, if nothing else, and spending a lot of time with a lot of organizations, I can tell you that not everyone, not even close to everyone, goes even that far. Brian, this has been absolutely fantastic. Everything that I absolutely hoped it would be. If people wanted to continue the conversation, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, so hopefully none of your listeners ever need our services. Let's just start there. If you want to contact me personally, my number one social media profile is on LinkedIn. So Brian Gill, Gill. Just search for Brian Gill, Gillware on LinkedIn. I should pop right up. Happy to connect. If you ever lose data traditionally because a server melts down or a laptop drive starts clicking or whatever, that's Gillware.com, Gillware. If you are a business owner and you are scared a little bit and you are wanting to take some steps forward in the world of cybersecurity, that is a company called Tetra Defense, Tetra like the fish, and they can help you with your risk consulting assessments. Or, gosh forbid, you actually got ransomwared and you're in the middle of a ransomware crisis, Tetra can also help you out with that.
Super. Anything else that you'd like to promote?
No, just thank you so much, Tom, for having me today. And it was a pleasure.
It was absolutely. I enjoyed the conversation. Until next time, thank you for being on the Software Process and Measurement Cast. In Reread Saturday News, this week we tackle Chapter 19 of Steve Tenden and Daniel Darone's Tame Your Workflow. Chapter 19 combines many of the moving parts from previous chapters into a set of tools for monitoring the execution of work. The authors pick up at the portfolio level developed in Chapter 18. Portfolio items, once committed and placed into flow, can contain many groups of work that Steve and Daniel term minimal outcome value effort or moves. That was in week 14. Once in flow, being worked on, a flow manager picks up managing the moves. The Software Process and Measurement Cast is the proud sponsor of the following event, the Agile Online Summit. We're a media sponsor. The Agile Online Summit was created for people who could not attend major conferences. This is its third year. It is this week, October 26th through the 30th. There's a link in the show notes. Go for free, but think about the VIP packages. In the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 623, next week, we will feature my interview with Christian Clausen, author of 5 Lines of Code for Manning Publications. We discuss why refactoring is needed and the rules Christian has developed to get the most value out of refactoring. And it's not like you're not spending time refactoring already, right? If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?